I think I finally identified the model of this radio. I knew that it was a Stromberg-Carlson. So doing some image searches, found on radio, what's it called? Radio Museum website. This one here looks just about like it, and it's called a Model 400H. Now this one has a little different bezel here, but outside of that it looks identical. And I printed out the 400 or Model 400 Stromberg-Carlson schematic from my collection of schematics, and it seems to match what I've got. Now another guy on YouTube had one that he found in the trash, and his actually looks exactly like what I have. So the bezel is the proper type. This is a screenshot of his video, except that that bezel is opposite of this one. I think somebody actually in the past restored this cabinet and put this bezel back on upside down. So I'll be turning it around so that it matches that one, which looks to be an unmodified one. And also the Stromberg-Carlson name was right down there in the bottom, right under the speaker grill, and mine is gone. I think that was removed when they did the restoration of the cabinet. It's almost a little ghost image of where that decal used to be, but that seems to be what it is, the Model 400. So got the schematic, so we'll go ahead and start looking at it. I got this Stromberg-Carlson out of the cabinet there, and I've already tested all the tubes. Everything tested out pretty good except for this first audio amp demodulator. That's the 7SQ7 right there, so it might work well enough to just give it a test. So I've got it hooked up to the dim bulb tester here, and then back to the variac, and then to the isolation transformer. So let's go ahead and switch everything on. Let's see, let's crank this up to about 40 volts so it starts displaying. There we go. Okay. I'll flip pump on the dim bulb tester. Turn the radio on. Get a real faint glow of the dial light there. Not much happening on the bulb. So I think we can go on up in voltage here. Doesn't look like it's drawing too much current. We've got about 80 volts. Still nothing on the bulb. The light's getting a little brighter. Looks like we're safe for voltage. Let's see what we got on wattage here. 14 watts. So let's go ahead and go up to full voltage. Is 120 volts or so. Get a pretty good glow on the bulb now. Let's back this down just a little bit. 118. Looks like it's coming to life. Tune something in. Oh, getting something. There we go. Has returned to normal. It has successfully handled more than 1,000 flights since the reschedule of flights. Oh, here, let me add a little antenna back here with my finger.
The airport's operation had been seriously affected over the past few days by unlawful assemblies, with nearly 1,000 flights being cancelled. The order was restored.
So it looks like this thing's working even without any input from me. But I'll still go ahead and replace those old wax paper capacitors and clean it up and get it working. Well, just doing a little forensics on this old 1940 vintage Stromberg-Carlson radio. And this is kind of the fun part for me, to figure out what's been done to this and how it was designed. One thing you'll notice is there's only one IF transformer sticking out the top, where there's normally two. So one's hidden someplace. Then we've got this one electrolytic capacitor that is, so it's two 15 microfarads. So we'll get to that in a minute. I pulled a couple tubes out here so I can flip this thing upside down. Once again, this thing does work, so I was wondering why it worked so well. And you can see that some work has been done to this, not recently, but probably maybe 60s, maybe even 50s. So here's the bottom of that electrolytic. Now I guess at some point at least one of the sections went bad, and then this capacitor here was just popped in there in parallel. They didn't take this one out of the circuit, they just added this one to it. So that's a 30 microfarad, so much bigger than it should be. Now here's another newer capacitor, plastic body, and at least the people that put it in had some put some insulation on the leads. Here's another one too that was added, newer capacitor. And the rest of these seem like they're original. They all say Stromberg-Carlson on them. They're the old waxy paper type capacitors. So I have no doubts that they're original. And now a lot of these old carbon composition resistors I've been checking, and many of them are out of spec, so I think I'm going to have to replace some resistors as part of this restoration too. Now here's something I haven't seen before. Look at this guy right here. And those little, I don't even know if they're going to show up on video, but super smaller than hair fine wires coming off of that coil. Very dangerous. I got to be real careful when I'm working around that not to break those. But that's the second IF coil. So it's not protected with a can, it's just protected by being underneath the chassis. And to adjust it, see there's this little phenolic part here. I think that's where the capacitors are stored. For tweaking it, and you can see there's a couple little holes there that I guess you put your tweaker through to align that IF transformer. So yeah, I enjoy this. I like to try to figure out when was this done and why was it done the way it was. Not properly for what we would call today. We'd want to go ahead and replace that, pull this one out of the circuit. That was probably done back in maybe the 50s or 60s when this was just an old radio. It wasn't something you wanted to restore. It was just somebody took it to the radio shop to get it fixed. They did a quick job. They didn't want to charge the customer too much, so they did the minimum amount of work, although they did good work. They didn't want to put a whole lot of money into something that you could probably buy in the 50s or 60s for not very much money. So I'm assuming that's probably why that was done. I'm not old enough to have been a radio technician back in the 50s and 60s, but that's what I would guess. And another thing too, some of these knobs have some cracks in them too. So I'm going to have to probably figure out a way to squeeze those back together and epoxy them so that they'll stay on the knobs here, handles. But everything's fairly decent shape, and getting ready to start doing some recapping. I'm even going to replace these that were replaced whenever they were, because I don't think, at least in this case, it's the wrong value anyway. Well, since I did have a bad, or at least a tested bad 6SQ7 out of the radio, decided to go into my stock, and I found a pretty much brand new old stock Sylvania 6SQ7. So I will go ahead and pop that in the radio. Now, since it did work, it'll be an interesting test, maybe after I'm done recapping this thing, is to try both tubes and see if there's an audible difference between the two, the one that tested bad and the one that's brand new. Since the old one did work in the radio, so that'll be fun. We'll do that. Alright, we got the Stromberg-Carlson radio all recapped here. New orange drops and a couple of electrolytics. Here's the one. There's a few dead ones. This one actually that was sitting right there. It was replaced, well, I don't know, where I was guessing 50s, 60s. It's completely bad. Has like no capacitance, and you can see it's starting to swell up right there. So it pretty much got dried out, but it was still in parallel with the can capacitor right there, which is generally not a good idea because those can capacitors short out. You know, even if you have another capacitor in parallel, it's still going to short out the radio and burn up your power transformer unless you have it fused, which this one isn't yet. I'm going to change that. So I've got the new electrolytic filter capacitors, and this was a 3-section can cap. It had what, 2 16s and then another little 20 microfarad at 25 volts, which is just a cathode bypass capacitor for the output tube, which I mounted right there. A few had been replaced before, and this guy here, of course, which was bad. And then this is one of the capacitors that was right over here. And it has, you notice, it has 2 wires coming out one side and one out the other. So it's what they called a dual capacitor. I've never seen these before. But it's a 0.05, and that had been replaced by at least one section of it. One section was still good, and the other section was bad. So whenever that had gotten replaced, this is what they put in, which was a 0.01 instead of a 0.05. So I put the proper one in there, and that's this one down here. And then this little, what do they call these, chocolate drops? That was right there. That was the coupling cap between first audio and the output tube. And it was actually still good, but I just went ahead and replaced it with an orange drop to freshen it up. So the one thing I still need to do to this is I've got a polarized line cord that I'm going to put on it, so I always have hot coming in on one line. And in that line I'm going to put a fuse, just one of the little kind of inline fuses down here, and then have that run over to the tone control, which also has the switch on the back, but the power switch. So that will add a capacitor in case anything shorts out in the radio, or not a capacitor, but a fuse, so that if the radio shorts out, it won't take out the transformer, and make it a little safer. But since I don't have that fuse right now, I had to order it. I'll go ahead and flip this over and we'll give it a shot. So there we go. I've got the new 6SQ7, the glass one in there, and it's working fine. And we'll do the test here where I put in the old one that tested bad and see how it works. This is kind of local news or sports talk station. Comes in okay. Unfortunately, the strongest station I have here in the Washington, D.C. area is this one here, which is the local Chinese government propaganda station.
And this requires the industry to pay more attention for obvious reasons.
I don't really like to listen to that one, but it does come in really strong, so
the loss of online
sometimes I use it for testing.
on the PC platform has reduced to 1.
So we'll put it back here.
South Carolina's Darlington
This is a little weaker one.
May 24th on the Charlotte Motor Speedway as well. Big release just offered about 20 minutes ago.
We'll go ahead and pop out this good tube here and put in the supposed bad one. Well, test weak anyway. It didn't test shorted out or anything, just kind of weak. Let it warm up.
Still raining in Silver Spring. It will continue. Same upper 50s tonight. Showers again tomorrow.
And it does work.
Low to mid 60s. It'll be
I think it's maybe slightly lower in volume,
Wake up with the Kevin Sheehan Show, 6
but
to 9 a.m. Monday.
here's the Chinese propaganda station again.
On both platforms, and apparently whoever is suffering from
Thank you, Scott. Joining us now, Dr. David J. Chow at Pro Football.
I don't know, maybe I'll just go ahead and use that old one. It seems to work.
How are you?
Use it until it stops working.
Thank you.
Save my new old stock one back there for when it does eventually go out.
Have you seen all of it yet, or?
Alright, I got the new index power cord installed. It goes in right here. And the hot lead goes to a fuse. I put a 2 amp fuse in there, and that goes over to the power switch and then off to the radio. So and I checked, and it's drawn about 3/10 of an amp, maybe a little bit more when it first starts up. So I put a 2 amp fuse in there. That should be plenty. So that will do it. It's working properly and ready to go back in the cabinet. Now, it looks like originally the radio had these little feet that actually held it in there, and I only seem to have 2 of them. So these measure out to be 832s. So I got a couple 832 screws that I'll put in there, and then maybe put some fabric feet on the bottom where those go to protect whatever it sits on. That should hold it in there securely. Now here's the Stromberg-Carlson radio from 1940, fully restored, and reverted this in the cabinet because I think that's the proper way, although it was on backwards initially. Just shined it up with some polish, and sounded good and playing well. Thanks for watching.